fight to my last breath!
Victory for the Forsaken!
Anyone order a one-man wrecking crew? Pandemonium!
My hatred is unending.
Crusade calls.
Let's save some lives.
Glory to the Horde!
2 minutes, so either way, AMD is doing a lot better than previously. Ryzen holds a lead here, even if it does come down to a difference of about 1.1%. But now it's time to move on to gaming workload. So if you want to see the rest of the synthetics and other tests, that includes Firestrike, Cinebench, and Time Spy and POV Ray benchmarks, you can find all of that in the link in the description below in the full review article. Moving on to Battlefield 1, the 6900K and 7700K overclocked with some loss and lows are bumping against a wall around 141 to 142 FPS average. We're still seeing the high IPC and clock rates of the 7700K planting the chip about equal to an i7 6900K. This remains true for the 6700K, the i5 7600K, and the i7 4790K. The i5 6600K begins to drag behind a bit at 137 FPS average, and that CPU is eventually trailed by the R7 1800X overclocked to 3.9 GHz, which lands somewhere around 135 FPS average. The 1% lows hover around 109 with 0.1% at 94 for the overclocked version of the CPU. And considering the low percentile performance of neighboring chips, that's good performance overall. However, considering the price and age of those nearby chips, the 1800X doesn't look so great in this particular benchmark. Ultimately, the $500 R7 1800X is effectively equivalent to an i5 4690K in this Battlefield 1 benchmark. The i5 4690K came out a few years ago and once retailed for $240. Trade-offs abound as usual, with the R7 being better in production. But one thing is clear, the 1800X is not impressive in the Battlefield 1 department, and is matched evenly by 2014 Intel architecture. You may have noticed a black bar across the data. Let's remove that now. Disabling SMT, or simultaneous multi-threading, on the R7 1800X results in performance that boosts us to 135 FPS average from the 132 FPS average of the stock clocked R7 1800X. Because Gamers Nexus also measures frame times, we benefit from the knowledge that disabling SMT further increases 1% low and 0.1% low metrics by upwards of 30 FPS in some cases, around 30% better 1% low values with SMT off. You'd be better off disabling SMT than overclocking in some cases, so if you do both, you'll get even more performance jump. And by the way, AMD is not alone in that. Previously, in much older architectures when we tested years ago, Intel's hyperthreading did add a bit of overhead to the point where in some games and applications, disabling hyperthreading might have gotten you 1 to 2% FPS increase. Not as big of a difference as AMD is seen here with this SMT toggling, but also AMD is not alone. The overhead from multi-threading, simultaneous or hyper-threading, however you want to call it, is real, and it's something we've seen in the past. It just so happens that Intel doesn't really see that effect anymore. Total War was only just added to our charts in time for the 7600K review, so all the i7 CPUs haven't been fully consumed by the Warhammer benchmark yet. Warhammer also gets finicky about the stability of some overclocks, so as you'll see in the frame time metrics for the 6900K, they can jump up and down a bit to the point where it's not always the most usable metric for this particular game. Warhammer appreciates clock speed to a great extent. We see the trade-off between cores and frequency when ricocheting between the 7700K and 6900K processors. i7 7700K falls ahead in every regard when pitted against the 6900K thanks to its 4.5 and 5.1 GHz clock, and land around 186 to 187 FPS average, and that's stock. As for the Ryzen R7 1800X, the new Zen Arc CPU lands between the 7350K stock and the 5.0 GHz overclocked variant. Total War shows a clear frequency focus, further emboldened by the 1800X's 5 FPS, or about 4% increase from a 200 MHz overclock. Partly for this reason, among other architectural advantages, Intel again holds the lead even with processors of significantly lower cost. We still wouldn't recommend that you go out and buy an i3 7350K, not for $180 anyway, but the 1800X performs just slightly better than the overpriced but still cheaper i3 K-SKU CPU. Let's move that blackout bar. Total Warhammer now shows the biggest change in performance when disabling SMT. The AMD R7 1800X moves from 127 to 132 FPS average, depending on test and speed, to 153 FPS average with SMT off. Disabling AMD's most advertised property is increasing performance in the best case, or in the worst case, resulting in basically no performance difference. SMT seems to hamstring frame latency to some extent and creates enough overhead to burden us in Total Warhammer. Let's look at Watch Dogs 2 next. At 1080p high, we're seeing the 6900K top charts around 119 FPS, where we're beginning to encounter a GPU bottleneck on the 1080 FTW. The low percentile performance sits at 94 FPS 1%, 77 FPS 0.1%. Comparatively, the half-price R7 1800X is operating around 84 FPS average with 1% lows hanging around 62 FPS and 50 FPS 0.1%. In terms of raw frame rate, that is a performance delta of approximately 35 FPS in averages between the two. Comparatively, the 7700K stock operates at around 113 FPS average, with the 6700K Skylake CPU around 110 average. Even the Devil's Canyon 4790K circa second quarter 2014 is outperforming the R7 1800X, placing at 100 FPS average. Disabling hyperthreading on the 7700K plants us about equal to the R7 1800X SMT enabled, so 8 cores, 16 threads, further demonstrating an architectural advantage for Intel right now in gaming workloads outside of the raw core and thread count of the AMD CPU. Overclocking the 1800X pushes to 87 FPS average with marginal improvements in the lows. The maximum sustainable overclock with our chip and motherboard seems to be about 3.9 GHz, resulting in an increase of 3.2% from stock. So we're at 3.7 gigahertz on all core stock, or 3.9 with the OC. And ultimately for Watch Dogs 2, the 1800X performs mostly equally to an Intel i5 7600K CPU for $240. Disabling SMT reveals that performance is largely the same in Watch Dogs 2, not as profound as in Total Warhammer, netting an output of 85 FPS average versus the original 84.3 FPS average. So SMT doesn't really help AMD here, but it's not hurting either. And by the way, Watch Dogs 2 will utilize all the threads to some extent. It's not the only thing that matters in this case. Clock rate still matters, but this illustrates quite clearly that just having more cores doesn't win all arguments by default, and that's something we've experienced time and again with CPU architectures that venture into high core count territory. For time reasons, you can find Ashes of a Singularity, Metro Last Light, and GTA in the article in the description below if you want those benchmarks. We're going to move on to a little bit of 1440p now. When we presented some of our early findings to AMD, they suggested that we benchmark the CPU by creating a GPU bottleneck with 1440p resolution. Still, it's a little misleading to the overall capabilities of the CPUs. Such a benchmark means that future GPU upgrades could be bottlenecked by the CPU, which wouldn't be known if we were incorrectly testing the CPU by imposing GPU bottlenecks. Regardless, we ran a few anyway, despite only having 4 days to test the CPU. Here's a look at Watch Dogs 2 at 1440p high. The AMD R7 1800X, even when taking AMD's suggestion of burdening the GPU, is still performing at a frame rate deficit to the cheaper 7700K. Now, of course, the next argument might be that the visible difference between 86 and 77 FPS average is not profound, and that'd be a fine argument. It unfortunately doesn't make sense to spend more money and get less. It's just bad value. Besides, when considering the CPU and platform tend to last the longest in the system, the upgrade pathways are going to be better on the platform, which has the highest baseline performance. Frame times suffer a bit with the 1800X falling to 48, 0.1% low, 60 FPS 1% low versus the 7700K at 68, 0.1% and 74, 1%. This isn't something where we're seeing stuttering. You'd have to fall a lot lower for that. So mark that very clearly, not stuttering, but it does indicate that AMD has other potential weaknesses that could emerge under the right conditions or later on. The next argument might be that mixed workload users like content creators would benefit from production advantages afforded by Ryzen. That's a much stronger argument, but still has caveats and counters. We'll point you back to the premier benchmarks for that discussion. Moving on to Battlefield 1 at 1440p, we're definitely developing a GPU bottleneck and beginning to invalidate the wants of 120 and 144Hz users. The 1800X using the GPU as a crutch is now more or less on par with the 7700 and 6900K CPUs, and we're still seeing a decreased frame latency versus Intel, but just like with Watch Dogs 2, that's not producing any noticeable stuttering to the end user. It's just measurable. In this particular title, benchmarking incorrectly does make the numbers better for the 1800X, but the 7700K still outperforms it, is cheaper, and really we have to defer to the R7 1700 at $330 to see how AMD's future looks with gaming titles. That's not tomorrow. At this point, you might be feeling a little disillusioned when considering AMD's previous tech demos. Keep in mind that most of these charts leaked and the AMD official benchmarks shown were based on Cinebench or were gaming workloads that were inflated in one way or another by doing a few different things in benchmarking. In the Sniper Elite demo, AMD frequently looked at the skybox when reloading and often kept a larger percentage of the skybox in the frustum than the other side-by-side Intel processor. A skybox has no geometry, which is what loads the CPU withdrawal calls, and so it'll inflate the frame rate by nature of testing with a chaotically conducted methodology. As for the Battlefield 1 benchmarks that were demonstrated at the Sonoma event, AMD conducted these using other chaotic methods wherein AMD would zoom more frequently or at different intervals than the side-by-side Intel CPU, making it mostly impossible to actually compare the two head-to-head. So you're left with a number that basically says that these are more or less equal. And most importantly of all, these demos were run at a 4K resolution. It creates a GPU bottleneck, meaning we're no longer observing true CPU performance. There's an argument to be made that low-end performance doesn't matter if you're stuck on the GPU, but that argument doesn't always hold. You don't buy a worse-performing product for more money, especially when GPU upgrades in the future will eventually even out those limitations as bottlenecks external to the CPU advantage. As for blender benchmarking, although AMD was looking at deltas, and so it doesn't matter too much, AMD did demonstrate its blender benchmarks using different settings to what we recommend. In its blender testing, AMD executes renders using just 150 samples per pixel, or what we consider to be preview quality, and runs unoptimized, well, somewhat, at 32 by 32 tile sizes. Not awful, but we'd recommend 16 by 16. They also render at 800 by 800 resolution. In our benchmark, we render using 400 samples per pixel for release candidate quality, 16 by 16 tiles, and a 4K resolution. This means that our benchmarks are not comparable to AMD's, but they are comparable against the other CPUs we've tested. As for Cinebench, AMD ran those tests with the 6900K platform using memory and dual channel rather than its full quad channel capabilities. That's not to say that these results would drastically change, but it's also not representative of how anyone is using the X99 platform. Cinebench isn't everything, and neither is core count. As software developers need to support more threads, if they do, perhaps AMD would look better. For now, it is clearly not a good buy, the 1800X that is, in the gaming market. There is an argument to be made for the 1800X and its value in production workloads. Again, Premiere and Blender, it looks pretty good compared to the $1,000 Intel chip. Half the price, it performs at least equally, if not slightly better, other than the Intel. So there it looks good, but again, you have to consider, are these workloads that are production focused something you can push to a much faster GPU, even if it's a 1070 or something like that, because at that point, there's not a lot of reasons to buy either the $1,000 or the AMD $500 chip. There are uses for the software acceleration, but if you're one of those people who needs that, you can hopefully figure out how the performance looks on your own. The R7-1700 may prove a better value for gaming. We'll have those benchmarks shortly. For now, though, the 1800X is a disappointment and is not a processor we would recommend for gamers at its price point. Even mixed workload users should consider when and where software acceleration is better than GPU acceleration, if ever. But yes, overall, the 1800X is an impressive competitor to the 6900K, and it's significantly cheaper, so we'd recommend the 1800X over the 6900K if you're in one of those use case environments where it makes sense to have such a thing. For now, we're going to suggest waiting for the R7-1700 review if you're a gamer and hopefully buying in a lower end market, because that might have a better chance of competing with Intel, considering the giant price performance disparity between lower end chips and the higher end chips for both AMD and Intel. That's all for this one. Thank you for watching. As always, patreon.com/gamersnext if you would like to help us fund this type of in-depth analysis. Link in the description below for more information. Definitely subscribe to the 1700 and 1700X reviews. Tear down that we'll be posting shortly. I'll see you all next time.
Retreat. I'm here.
Activate the shrines. Take the Dragon Knight's power.
Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you, and today is the day of reckoning. Today is the day we've all been waiting for. It doesn't matter whether you're a red boy or a blue boy, today is the day that we've all been waiting to hear. Is it really good as we've been led to believe? Well, hopefully I'm going to be able to help you. Now what I'm going to be doing is I'm not going to mess around with too much other than 1800X, because that's the processors that we've been sent first. We will be getting the 1700X and the 1700. I think they're going to be printing them out a week apart. So reviews are going to be staggered. But we've got the big boy first. The 1800X, it's 8 cores. It's got hyper-threading, so it's got 16 threads. Basically what that means is your system will see effectively 16 cores, because you can put 2 instructions into each core at a time. It's very similar to the way Intel do it. So 8 cores, 16 thread. Base clock is 3.6 gigahertz. It then boosts to 4 gigahertz, although that is something we will be covering in depth on this as well. The X has also got XFR, so it does mean it can go a little bit further if it can. Temperature dependent and system dependent. Again, this is something that I will be covering. But I don't want to go into too much detail other than that, because all the scientific mumbo jumbo is not really something that we have time for, and let's face it, if I really went into it, this video would be 2 hours long. So if you want to know all the scientific stuff about the cores and the layouts and literally all the silicon stuff that's going on, then you can go and have a look at the written review on the OC3D website, or you can go and watch another video from someone else on YouTube. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to keep it like chatting to your mate at the pub, because that's the way I prefer to do things. So we will be getting a little bit nitty-gritty. I do need to show you the system running, because I do need to explain to you about the way it boosts. I do need to explain to you about the difference between single thread and then multi-thread applications, because the CPU does act differently to them as well. I also do need to talk to you about temperatures, and there's some weird stuff going on with temperatures, but we do need to get all in with that. Then there is a plethora of tests, because I've secretly been testing old AMD stuff in the background for the last couple of weeks. And the reason why I've done that is they've not really released anything for a while. We've since switched to Windows 10. We've updated the games on our CPU test rig. So there was a lot of stuff where there would have been massive, great gaping holes of tests. So we went back and we dug the 8320 out, and retested that. We dug the FX6350 out, we retested that. We dug an FM2 rig out, and we retested a quad-core Athlon. And the reason why we did this, because you're thinking, we don't want to know about old results. Yeah, you do, because this is the first big, massive release from AMD for such a long time. It's a really good point to be able to, rather than my graphs, because let's face it, there's not been many launches and everything would have been Intel, we've now got AMD results in there as well, up to date with the current suite, with all the latest benchmarks, the 3D Mark Firestrike Ultra, the VR benchmarks. We've since started running Geekbench and RealBench and all those ones, so we've now got those results in as well. So we can not only say where it is in comparison to Intel, but we can actually say it in comparison to where they came from and where, you know, where they were before. So how far have AMD come from their own stuff? This is another really, really big talking point that we have spent so many days going over this secretly in the background to try and, you know, give us more to talk about, rather than everything that AMD's been talking about, which is 6900K, 6900K, 6900K. Why not talk about their own 8 cores to see how far they've come from them? So we've done a lot of digging, we've done a lot of stuff going on in the background. So next thing we really need to talk about is the AM4 socket, because that's new as well, and that's brilliant. Okay, so a slightly weird way to go about it, but a lot has changed with the socket and the chipset as well. So this is the Crosshair 6 Hero. This is AM4, this is the new motherboard. This is the Crosshair 5 Formula Z. This is the old one. This is the one it replaces. It has been replaced. You know what I mean. So I thought this was just a really good way to point out the instant changes. Really good and main point is AM4 is a different size socket. So the mounts here for the CPU are actually wider than the AM3 ones here. So this one would have been AM3, AM3 Plus, FM2, FM2 Plus. So basically everything, the old ones, and these are slightly narrower mounts than these ones. So there's two very clear things that we do need to say. Is you either need to get a different CPU cooler to the one that you've got at the moment, or if you've got like an AIO or something, a lot of manufacturers will be doing upgrade kits, unless that you have one of the coolers that latches onto these parts. Because if your cooler latches onto these, then it will fit and it will mount fine anyway. If your CPU cooler, you have to take these black parts off and bolt it through the board, then you're going to need a new one. Unless you buy the Crosshair 6 Hero, because you can take these off and it's got the screw mounts for the AM4 and the AM3 actually on there. It works with both. None of the other motherboards that are available on the market at the moment come with both of those. So that's something that I've had loads of questions on the preview videos that I've done online, asking me whether it supports AM3 and stuff, so with the other brands, and none of them do at the moment. So with the other thing to think about as well is it's now DDR4, so we've upgraded, so you're going to need new memory. This is DDR3, it isn't compatible, you can't go between the two. other upgrades that we have got on here now is we do have M.2 support. And the M.2 support, you didn't have it on this, but it does use 4 PCI Express lanes, and it's PCI Express